Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So we are going to start the next session. Do board connections between product market peers impede competition? Renping Li is the presenter.
So, hi everyone. I'm very happy and thankful to be here and present this paper about connections between product market peers impede competition. And it's a joint work with Radhakrishnan Gopalan and Alminas Zaldokas. So it has been long been argued that board connections between product market peers have the potential to impede competition and hurt consumer welfare. And in the US, the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914 bans a person's presence on the boards of two rival firms if this kind of connection can hurt consumers. But the enforcement has been far from perfect. It has been limited to the context of merger reviews, and regulators, they do not proactively search in the broader economy for violations. But things are changing in the recent couple of years. The FTC and DOJ, the two major antitrust enforcers in the US, they are joining their forces to upgrade the enforcement of the Clayton Act. And let me quote part of the speech from Jonathan Cantor, the head of the DOJ's antitrust division. It says that they are ramping up efforts to identify violations across the broader economy, and they will use the Section 8 to break up interlocking directories. And he also says that the DOJ's recent crackdown on interlocking directories is probably a very effective way of deconcentrating the US economy today. And we believe that board connections can have an important role in facilitating tacit coordination. And usually tacit coordination can be hard to sustain because it's hard to understand the rival's decision-making process, and there can be mistakes in interpreting the public signals that the rival firms send. And we think that board connections can facilitate tacit coordination in a couple of ways. It can potentially open up a channel for direct communication, or it can help build trust among competing firm decision makers and make them less likely to deviate from coordination. And just by observing how the other director votes and behave, a firm's director can learn about how the other firm's decision-making process is done. And despite all this discussion, the academic evidence on the anti-competitive effects of board connections is rare. And in this paper, we are going to answer two questions. First, how prevalent are board connections between competing firms? And second, do board connections between competing firms have anti-competitive effects? And so we use firms in the intersection of Commustat and Bordex, and we use the Holberg-Phillips industry classification. And we studied two kinds of connections. One kind is direct connection, another kind is indirect connection. And in the case of indirect connection, we have two competing firms are linked by a third intermediate firm. So you may ask, why do we study indirect connections? One reason is we found that they also have anti-competitive effects, but the magnitudes are smaller. And also, it has something to do with our identification, which I'll show you in a minute. And we found about 1,500 events of new direct board connections and about 4,000 events of new indirect board connections. And for each firm affected by board connections, we look for a control firm that's in the same industry and closest in terms of firm characteristics. And we observe both the affected and the control firm in a 7-year window around the new connection. And we stack those cohorts together and we run diff in diff. So we have treated and post and treated times post, and we have two kinds of treatment dummies. One kind is the firm forming a direct connection to a product market peer. Another kind is the firm forming an indirect connection. And we have firm and industry times year fixed effects. And this table summarizes our findings. We found that relative to matched controls, a firm's gross margin rises by 0.8 percentage points after forming a direct connection to a product market peer, and it rises by 0.4 percentage points after forming an indirect connection. And we find similar results using other measures of profitability, such as operating margin and ROA. And we also see some evidence of slower sales growth after direct connections. And here are the dynamics of the effects. We see there's no difference prior to the treatment, and we see the treated firms' profit margin rises after they bought connection. And this figure is for direct connections, and this figure is for indirect connections. So we can see the patterns are similar, but the magnitude of the effects are smaller. And we ask, can we have a causal interpretation of these results? And we don't really think so, because bought connections are endogenous, and we can think of a couple scenarios where this could be the case. So a firm might want to appoint a director who is also on another firm's board, and precisely when it anticipates an expansion of its future business opportunities, and the firm might want to exploit the business opportunity by hiring such a person who is an expert. And also the director in a firm with improving prospects can be more valued in the labor market, and therefore more likely to be hired by a competing firm. And in both of these scenarios, the new bought connections to product market peers correlate with unobservable future firm prospects. And to address these concerns, we look at non-focal firm-initiated bought changes that we believe to be less likely to be correlated with a firm's unobservable future prospects. So how do we do that? So let me give you an example here. Firm 1 is a treated firm, and firm 2 is its product market peer. And before the event here, firm 1 was neither directly nor indirectly connected to firm 2, but it was connected to an intermediate firm, firm 3. And during the event here, there's a director B, and he connects firm 2 and firm 3. And as a result, firm 1 becomes indirectly connected to firm 2 via this firm 3. And we can see that here, the new connection that firm 1 experiences is not because of any changes on its own board, but rather it's because of changes on the board of either firm 2 or firm 3. And therefore, we believe that this new connection that firm 1 experiences is more likely to be orthogonal to the future prospects of the firm 1 itself. And we are able to identify about 2,000 events of this kind. And in this case, the identifying assumption would be that new bought connections, which arise for reasons outside of the board of the treated firm itself, is orthogonal to the future prospects of the treated firm. And we think that this is more likely to hold. And with this, we still see an effect of rising profit margin after the bought connections. And this makes us more confident about the causality of our results. And now, the next thing we do is we want to talk about what is the mechanism here. So there's an elephant in the room here, kind of. So we believe the bought connections can enable anti-competitive practices in a wide variety of formats. But research also shows that bought connections can lead to better firm internal efficiency. So for example, there can be some good corporate governance practices that can spread across firms via the network of bought connections. And also there can be technology spillovers, and all of this can lead to higher profit margin. And we want to pin down the mechanism here, because if it's the anti-competitive mechanism, then regulators should be concerned. But if it's the internal efficiency mechanism, the consumers might actually benefit from it. So to pin down the mechanism and to establish that there is indeed anti-competitive mechanism here, we do 4 tests. And I'm going to spend most time on the first one because we think that's the most definite evidence. So we first look for evidence from the consumer goods sector. And second, we look at how bought connections correlate with detected cartel cases. And 3, we look at if the cross-sectional heterogeneities are consistent with the anti-competitive mechanism. And 4th, we look at if the spillover effects on the closest rivals that are not in the network is consistent with the anti-competitive mechanism. And so for the first one, we use the Nielsen retail scanner data. This is the second time we see this data set this morning, and it's a really nice data set. That's why, and we have, so I don't really need to introduce this. And we construct events of bought connections among firms in the same product category. And you can see it's very accurately defined. And we zoom into each zip code 3 area, and we put a threshold on the market share of connected firms. So when we define our treatment, we define it as the firm times product category times zip code 3 area level, because we want to avoid kind of situations where two firms, they both operate in an area, but their market shares are very small. In such cases, we should not expect any anti-competitive effects there. So then we construct a price index following prior literature, and we observe this price index of traded firms in a window around the new connection, and we use all untraded firms as the control, and we have the following regression. So we have two kinds of treatment times post-dummy, and we have firm times product category times zip code 3 area fixed effects, and we control for three kinds of time trends. So we have product category level time trend, we have zip code 3 area time trend, and we also have firm time trend. So we are able to have firm time trend here because in our data, a firm can sell in multiple product categories, and when it is connected to a product market peer, its peer might sell in some of the categories, but not all of the categories that the firm sells in. So we can have within a firm, parts of its sales is treated and other parts are not treated. So that's why we can have this very nice within firm variation. And with this, here is what we got. We found that after direct bot connections, the per quarter increase in product price is 0.22 percentage points faster for the sales of traded firms relative to the sales of untraded firms. And this corresponds to a 0.88 percentage point annualized difference. And this is kind of significant because during the sample period, the inflation annually is about only 2%. And we can also see that the effects are much stronger for direct bot connections compared to indirect bot connections. And next, we look at a different kind of anti-competitive practices, which is market division. So usually there are two kinds of anti-competitive practices. One kind is price fixing. Another kind is two firms can say that I sell in this market and you sell in that market, and we divide and we do not enter each other's market. And we can wield our market power in our respective markets. And some prior research has shown that this is also a kind of common anti-competitive practices. And to measure that, we construct firm pair level similarity in terms of the geographic distribution of their sales. And we have the following regression. So we still have two kinds of treatment times post-dummy, and we have time fixed effect and firm pair fixed effects. And here is our finding. We do see that the cosine similarity score of a firm pair drops after firm pairs form indirect bot connections. So these firms become more distant from each other. And we think that this suggests that they are trying to adjust their product offerings to avoid head-on competition. And we can see that the effects are there for indirect bot connections, but not for direct bot connections. And to summarize our findings here, we see that there can be different mechanisms of direct and indirect bot connections. The direct bot connections have much stronger effects on the product market prices. And when we look at indirect bot connections, its effect is mostly on the tendency to avoid direct competition and doing market division. And we think that's kind of a relatively more indirect way of being anti-competitive. So we really like these results because it gives us insight about how these two kinds of connections are different. And we can also see that there's a correlation between the distance of two firms in a network of directors and the probability of them having detected cartel cases. But we might want to be cautious about these results because according to the provider of the database, most of the cartels are not detected actually. And we see the cross-sectional heterogeneities are consistent with the anti-competitive story. The effects are stronger when the two firms are more closer and more similar, and also the effects are stronger in more concentrated industries. And we also found that the two mechanisms, they generate distinct predictions over the effects on the rival firms not involved in the newly formed director network. So if it's the anti-competitive mechanism, then we should expect that the firms that are not involved in the network but is a close rival of the newly connected peers, they could also benefit from the new connection because there would be possibly an increasing trend in the price in the industry, and a firm, even if it's not in the network, it can probably free ride this increasing price trend and benefit and get a better profit. But if it's the internal efficiency mechanism, then we would expect that the rival firms that are not in the network, they will be at a disadvantage because they don't get the benefits of better internal efficiency. And so that's why these two mechanisms can have different opposite predictions over the spillover effects of the bot connections. And our finding is we found some small but positive effects of spillover on the firms not in the network. And we think this is more consistent with the anti-competitive story compared to the internal efficiency story. So in summary, these tests of the mechanism suggest that there is indeed an anti-competitive mechanism here. And we have this range of robustness tests, and we have robustness to a range of different choices in this specification. And in the limited amount of time I have, I will spend it on how we engage our research with the common ownership literature. So there's an active discussion about the potential anti-competitive effects of common ownership. And we ask, could it be that we are just capturing the anti-competitive effects of common ownership, or are we capturing something that is new here? And indeed, we see there's an association between common ownership and new bot connection. We see that it is there, but we also look at what would happen if we control for the concurrent within industry common ownership increase during the sample period. And we found that when we control for it and we do this house race, the effects that we found of bot connections still largely hold. And this suggests that our findings is to some degree independent from the prior findings of the anti-competitive effects of common ownership, and is a somewhat new channel. So let me summarize here. We see that bot connections between product market peers, including indirect connections, can have positive profitability implications, and the evidence from the product market prices are consistent with the anti-competitive mechanism. And we argue that the full extent of the effects of bot connections can be bigger than what we show here, because we are quantifying the effects of incremental new bot connections. But the effects of the stock of all of the firm's existing bot connections can be larger than the numbers that we present here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. The discussant, Ran Duchin.
All right, well, thank you, Faye, Laura, who I don't think is here, the organizers, for inviting me. It's great to be here. I don't want to sound melodramatic, but I did want to take 1 minute and mention Radha, who we all know. I met him through our shared Michigan connection. He was a great scholar, great friend. And so, I think it's a testament to his scholarship and to his mentorship that we're still seeing his papers. And such a great paper for what it's worth. So let me jump straight in. I got a tough job today because this is a paper that won an award. And now I have to criticize it. I'll do my best to offer some helpful comments, but it is worthy of an award. It's a really good paper. Let me kind of try to first frame what the research question is, give you an overview of the results, and then offer some suggestions that I hope will be helpful for the authors. So, the question at the end of the day is, do firms that are competing in product markets engage in collusion, right? And if so, then how do they actually collude? Okay, and this, of course, has enormous implications for various stakeholders in society, for consumers, for investors, for policymakers, and so on. Okay, now, if you've watched Daniel's presentation, you know that theory is easy, right? It's easy to do theory. Everything is clean. You assume away all the frictions. The theoretical constructs are super straightforward. But unfortunately, those of us that chose to be empiricists, we have a tough life, right? Because in reality, the empirical proxies are not at all straightforward, certainly not in this case, right? I mean, collusion is inherently unobservable. How do you study collusion? Competition, I mean, there's tons of work just talking about how to measure competition, right? Is competition concentration? Is it different, right? And then you want to go out there and try to measure stuff like monopoly rents, consumer surplus. I'm not even mentioning social welfare, right? How do we measure all of this? It's just extremely difficult to do. And this paper tries to do all of it in some sense, right? Which is why I think it's an impressive and an ambitious paper. And on top of all of that, right, they're actually trying to provide causal estimates that link between these constructs. And so it's quite a task that they've taken upon themselves in this paper, okay? So how do they do this, okay? So they're going to study collusion through director interlocks, okay? So they're going to look at product market competitors, and they're going to try to argue that there's more scope for collusion when there's interlocking directors. Now, to be clear, this is quote-unquote illegal in the United States. If you go back to the Clayton Act of 2014, direct interlocks between competitors are actually disallowed. Of course, enforcement is a different story, which is why you guys have quite a few of those direct interlocks in your sample. But you also have this nice innovation in the paper. You say, well, let's look at indirect interlocks. Those are not outlawed in some sense, right? I can have one of my guys sit on the board of a third company together with a guy from my competitor sitting on that same board, and that's not governed by the Clayton Act in any way. By the way, this Clayton, the name of the Clayton Antitrust Act has nothing to do with Clayton Hall. I just want to make this clear. This is actually a senator from Alabama, not a senator from Delaware that was sponsoring this law. I didn't know. I checked. Okay. How are they going to measure competition? Where they're gonna use measures based on the Hoberg and Phillips classification, which by now I think we're all pretty much familiar with. And then they're gonna go and use what you've seen before today. They're gonna use Nielsen retail scanner data. That's the most impressive part of the paper. In some sense, if I were you, this is all I would do in the paper, but we can get to that in a second. But it's really nice data that allows you to study the implications or the mechanisms through which anti-competitive behavior kind of takes shape. And then they're going to try to provide measures or some causal estimates through this idea that, hey, you know, if there's an indirect interlock that becomes that kind of comes into play, not through the action of the focal company, but through the action of either the intermediate third company or the other competitor, that's quote-unquote quasi-exogenous from the viewpoint of the focal firm. And so that's their instrument. Okay? So again, they're trying to solve all of these issues in one paper using great data and great empirical design. All right, so what are the main results? So one main result, which is a descriptive result, but to me, this is a result in itself, is that there's just so many of those interlocks. Again, the Clayton Act says there shouldn't be, but there are. And I think that's in itself an interesting finding. Okay? And then they run firm-level analysis. You've done a great job showing what the specification is. Let me just kind of summarize it in a single sentence. It's a matched sample diff in diff around kind of the appointment of these connected interlocking directors. And what they show you is that when that happens, when firms appoint those interlock directors, profitability increases, and they have a bunch of different measures for that. Okay? And then what I think is the strongest, most convincing part of the paper, they're going to use product-level analysis. They're going to use scanner data. And they're going to look at the prices of overlapping products and show that they increase. Okay, and so this is evidence, presumably, of anti-competitive behavior, of collusion. And they're also showing very interestingly that they kind of say, well, look, I'm not going to step into your territory. I'm going to stay away. And so let's use that to kind of increase prices and behave anti-competitive in a less competitive and kind of reduce competition. All right, and there's other evidence in the paper, but let me skip that. So it's a big question. It's a huge question. And my first comment is, it's such a big question, but you frame your paper so narrowly. The way you've presented it today, I think, really kind of resembles what you've done in the paper. I think you can kind of go way deeper and frame the paper as a paper that actually does address a very big question about competition, antitrust, collusion, concentration. I mean, it's just, just in I/O, this is their bread and butter. This is all they do. It. Your paper kind of takes a narrow view on this, and I don't think it does you any service. I would actually try to broaden the scope much more. And I just threw some buzzwords here, but of course, these are all stuff. This is all stuff that you can kind of use to provide better context and place your paper, right? I mean, think about ways that flow through ownership when it comes to competition, such as mergers and acquisitions. Think about other ways to collude, right? Joint ventures, strategic alliances, common owners, which you kind of address in the paper. I think you should place your paper in this literature. It'll broaden the scope much more. Maybe you'll become the second paper on this program to make it into the AER, which is kind of what we're trying to do here. Okay. I was also a little bit so at some level it's easy to come and say, look, I mean these interlock directorships actually allow firms to collude, but I was trying to, how does that actually work in practice, right? What's your hypothesis? Is it that firms, want to collude, and then they're like, well, I don't know anyone there. Let's try to get some interlocking directors here and make this happen, or do you have in mind the world where, interlock directors kind of wake up one day and say, oh, I know this guy, this other firm, so let's just start colluding. Right? I mean, I think it actually does matter, because even if you think about your instrument, right, your instrument doesn't say much about the first bullet point. It's actually more about the second. So I think you want to try to think about it more, and I think it actually does matter. I mean, you really do want to think about how this would work in practice, right? I mean, if you want to collude, you actually need those formal directorships and appointments, right? I mean, why would you ever want to leave a paper trail? In fact, in the paper, you show that those director appointments increase the likelihood of detection. So if anything, you're kind of providing regulators with ways to identify, hey, we're potentially engaging in collusion. And so you want to think about this, and you want to think about this in the context of the incentives of these interlock directors. Like, why are they doing this, right? I mean, at some level, they're taking some risks because they can get prosecuted, right? And so what does it do to them, right? Do they get more compensation out of it? Do they get prestige? Do they get more directorships? I think this is something you definitely want to kind of try to think about as you frame, as you kind of improve, I think, or at least revise the framing of your paper. The other thing that you've mentioned, quite a bit, and I don't want to get into it too much, I'm not from the identification police in any way, is that, obviously interlocks are non-random, right? And so, this obviously creates a huge issue for you in terms of identification. I think your solution to look at those changes in those intermediate firms, I don't think it really satisfies the exclusion restriction, to be quite honest with you. I mean, these other firms, you're not even excluding firms that are potentially competitors. And then on top of this, who knows who these firms are? Are they in the same industry? Are they exposed to the same shocks? So, like my suggestion, you don't even need that in the paper. I think you just want to go straight into the scanner data. That's your strongest result and your most believable result. Everything else around is just going to get you into trouble, if you ask me. The one other thing I was thinking about, when you do your diff and diff, you're kind of looking at firms that are appointing interlock directors, and you're comparing them to the closest industry peer. Why not compare them to firms that are actually appointing directors? Why not compare them to firms that are actually appointing interlocking directors, but not with competitors? That will allow you to at least hold constant the decision to add another director or to change the composition of the board. I mean, it just seems like a cleaner, if you like, framework or specification in my view. So, do whatever you do now, but you can do this as well. And I think this will at least help you kind of mitigate some concerns about the appointment decision itself, the timing of the appointment. You can control for the qualifications of the directors that both the controlled and treated firms are appointing. So I think these are all things that you can do to strengthen your analysis. I have 1 minute? Okay. So the one other thing that I was kind of thinking, you could provide a little bit more context about this. And what I like about the way you do this with your scanner data is that you actually have a measure now of anti-competitive behavior, or if you like, collusion. So now start there and go back and try to see what affects that. What are the determinants? How much of it is coming through interlocking directors? How much of it is coming through joint ventures? How much of it is coming through mergers and acquisitions? I think that would be a really cool way, maybe for another paper, I don't know. But I think you can actually take a step back and put what you're doing here, which is a very narrow kind of setting that you have, and put it in a broader context that allows us to understand better kind of this entire kind of anti-competitive behavior that you see in the scanner data. All right. I'll stop there. I'll share this with you. I have a few other kind of minor comments and suggestions that I think would benefit the paper. But overall, it's a great paper. It's a paper on a really important topic. Do we really need 94 pages? This is not a question that I'm asking just you. In general, as a profession, do we need 150-page papers? I vote no. For what it's worth, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a really great discussion. And so we definitely will think more about how to broaden the scope and place it better in the literature. And also we'll need to think more about the incentive of these directors. And as to why we put the scanner results in the second part of the paper, it's because when we posted the first version of the paper, it actually does not have the scanner results. So it's kind of just because of legacy, so we started from firm level to scanner level, but we think there are rooms for improvement of how we arrange these results. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting paper and discussion. I guess one thing I'm left wondering about is if you examined who the director is, right? So who are these companies appointing to their boards? When the boards add new people, they add them strategically in some ways, right? If there's something that's lacking, a skill set that's lacking, is it an activist investor, which would even make the product market connection finding make sense? So I think it would be helpful if you can provide some descriptives on who they're actually adding to the board. That'll just help us to understand that a little bit more.
I see, and thank you. So we do have some results on that. We see that they are connecting directors. They are similar in terms of their age and gender and education and years of experience, etc., to a general appointment. But we do find that they are, on average, more connected compared to a general appointment. And we also look at the source of nominations. So who nominates these directors, whether it's an existing director or the CEO or some shareholders, and we do not really see anything significantly different there between a connecting director and directors in general.
I'm trying to see if I can articulate an alternative explanation. Let's say Chipotle and McDonald's has a common director, right? Chipotle raises its prices and it says, hey, you know what, we raise the prices, customers are still coming. McDonald's, it's like you almost have free market research. So McDonald's then raises its prices and you see the profits in McDonald's also going up. So it sounds like it's collusion, but it's really they're taking advantage of free market research data in that sense.
So I think this scenario could still be categorized into some kind of coordination. Like if they don't have the marketing data shared, then they probably wouldn't be raising their prices in the first place. And so I think the scenario talked about maybe can still be generally a case of coordination that hurts consumer welfare. So I think that's kind of within the scope of what we are interested in. Thank you.
More questions?
A very quick question. I also really like the scanner data results. There's just one piece of evidence I want to just quibble a little bit or ask for your take. You find that using the scanner data, you find that direct board connections lead to price fixing, and indirect board connections lead to avoidance of direct computation. That seems a little bit of a counter to my intuition, because price fixing seems to be easier to to detect and capture by the regulators. And you have direct board connections to begin with. You're already on the high priority list of regulator. Why do you want to resort to these very overt anti-competitive behavior? If anything, if you have direct board connection, I would actually expect to see probably avoidance of direct computation as a less overt anti-competitive strategy.
So I think we need to think more about the answer to this question, but maybe I'll talk about it later. Thank you.
We have last question.
So do you look at who these peers are? If the peer is also a RPE peer, relative performance evaluation peer in the compensation contracts, then there would be incentive to compete stronger. So you should find, because some of these peers are going to be the ones that the firm discloses that it uses in compensation contracts. Some are not, right? If they are the performance peers, then your effect should be attenuated, should be smaller, right? Because there's more incentive that the firm is going to compete as opposed to collude. Then you can kind of point to the collusion still. Collusion would be stronger when these peers are not RPE peers as opposed to being RPE peers.
I see. I think this is a very interesting cross-sectional heterogeneity we can check. We might need to control for the degree of similarity because when the firms are more similar, they are more likely to be peers in the compensation contract, but they are also closer in their business. So that means the effects can be stronger. So I think we kind of need to control for confounding factors, but we can add this heterogeneity.
It's an empirical question, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.